Dr. Elena Vasquez adjusted her wire-rimmed glasses and settled into seat 12B of the high-speed rail from Chicago to Boston. Her medical bag rested securely beneath the seat in front of her, containing surgical instruments and classified research documents for tomorrow's emergency consultation at Massachusetts General Hospital. The encrypted tablet in her jacket pocket buzzed softly, a message from the CDC's Infectious Disease Division confirming her arrival time. She hadn't spoken to anyone since boarding, maintaining the professional composure that had served her well through 15 years of emergency medicine and 3 tours as a military surgeon in Afghanistan. But the middle-aged businessman in 12A had been watching her with increasing agitation since departure. Richard Thornton shifted uncomfortably, his expensive suit wrinkled from nervous fidgeting. He kept glancing at Elena's medical bag, at the way she occasionally checked her tablet, at her calm, methodical movements. To him, her quiet efficiency looked suspicious. Her olive complexion and accented English when she'd thanked the conductor only reinforced his growing paranoia. "Miss," he called to a passing train attendant, his voice tight with manufactured concern. "I think you should know, the woman next to me has been acting very strange. She keeps checking some kind of device, and she's got a bag full of things." Conductor Sarah Mitchell paused, glancing between them. Elena looked up from her tablet, eyebrows raised slightly. "Sir, is there a specific concern?" Sarah asked diplomatically. "She's been secretive since we left Chicago. Won't talk to anyone. And that bag," he gestured toward Elena's medical case. "I saw metal instruments when she opened it earlier. Could be weapons." Elena closed her tablet with deliberate calm. "I'm Dr. Elena Vasquez, traveling to Boston for a medical consultation. These are surgical instruments, and I'm reviewing patient files. Is there an issue?" But Thornton's fear had already taken root. Anyone can claim to be a doctor. "I want that bag inspected. For everyone's safety." Sarah looked uncertain. Recent terrorism alerts had put all transportation staff on edge. "Dr. Vasquez, would you mind showing us your credentials and perhaps opening your bag?" Elena's jaw tightened. She'd faced down insurgents in Kandahar, operated in field hospitals under mortar fire, but this felt different, more personally degrading. "I'm not obligated to display my belongings without reasonable suspicion. If you believe there's a genuine threat, contact the authorities and follow proper protocol." Other passengers began to notice the commotion. Phones emerged from pockets, some recording, others texting updates. The businessman leaned forward aggressively. "See? She won't cooperate. Innocent people don't act like this." Elena pulled out her phone, not her personal device, but the secure satellite phone issued by the CDC for emergency communications. She dialed a number most people didn't even know existed. "This is Dr. Elena Vasquez, authorization code 7 Alpha 99 Delta, she spoke quietly into the device. "I'm aboard Acela Express 2165, currently being detained without cause while carrying classified medical intelligence. Request immediate verification and assistance." The call lasted 30 seconds. She ended it and placed the phone on her tray table. "Now we wait," she said simply. Sarah looked confused. "Wait for what?" "For your supervisor to receive a call from the Department of Health and Human Services explaining why detaining a CDC medical officer carrying urgent infectious disease protocols is a federal offense." Thornton scoffed. "CDC? Right. Anyone can make claims." His words were cut off as Sarah's radio crackled to life. She stepped away to take the call, her expression growing increasingly alarmed. When she returned, her entire demeanor had changed. "Dr. Vasquez, I apologize for any inconvenience. Is there anything we can do to ensure your comfort for the remainder of the journey?" But Thornton wasn't backing down. "This is ridiculous. You're all being manipulated." "She could have called anyone, said anything." Elena turned to face him directly. "Mr. Thornton, yes, I know your name from your credit card transaction at the cafe car. You decided I was a threat the moment you saw me. Not because of anything I did, but because of what I look like, how I sound. You made your judgment before you knew anything about who I am or what I do. That's not I was just being careful. Careful would have been observing actual suspicious behavior. What you did was profile me based on your assumptions and then demand that I prove my innocence to satisfy your prejudices." The train car had grown quiet, other passengers now openly watching the confrontation. Elena stood, her voice controlled but carrying the authority of someone accustomed to life and death decisions. "I've spent the last decade saving lives, including treating soldiers who look exactly like you in field hospitals overseas. I've worked in the CDC's most sensitive programs, helping prevent disease outbreaks that could kill thousands. But none of that matters to you, because you saw a Latina woman with a medical bag and decided I must be dangerous." Thornton's face flushed red. "You're playing the race card now? Pathetic." The slap came so fast that nearby passengers gasped. Thornton's hand connected with Elena's cheek, the sound echoing through the train car like a gunshot. Elena didn't flinch. She turned her head slowly back to face him, her dark eyes cold and steady. She didn't need to say anything. The absolute stillness that followed spoke volumes. Within minutes, transit police were boarding at the next station. But they weren't there for Elena. The video footage spread across social media within hours. #train incident began trending as clips showed Elena's calm professionalism contrasted against Thornton's aggressive behavior and eventual assault. News outlets picked up the story. CDC doctor assaulted on train after racial profiling incident. Elena's hospital colleagues at Mass General confirmed her sterling reputation. Former patients came forward with testimonials about the doctor who had saved their lives. Military veterans shared stories of her service in combat zones. Thornton, meanwhile, was arrested for assault and subsequently fired from his investment firm when the videos went viral. His social media history revealed a pattern of discriminatory comments that his former employers could no longer ignore. The CDC issued a statement supporting Dr. Vasquez and announcing a review of protocols for protecting medical personnel traveling with sensitive materials. Amtrak implemented new training programs for staff on handling discrimination complaints and recognizing legitimate medical professionals, but Elena's response was characteristically measured. In a brief statement, she said, "I don't want this incident to define me or derail important medical work. However, if it helps other professionals avoid similar treatment, then something positive can come from it." 6 months later, Elena was invited to speak at a medical conference about bias in healthcare and transportation. She almost declined. Public speaking wasn't her forte, and she preferred working behind the scenes, but she thought about the young Latina medical students who might face similar situations someday. She thought about the message her silence might send versus the impact of her voice. The auditorium was packed. Elena stood at the podium, looking out at hundreds of faces: doctors, nurses, medical students, transportation officials. "I didn't choose to become a symbol," she began. "I was just trying to get to work. But sometimes the moments that define us aren't the ones we plan for. They're the ones where we decide whether to stay quiet or speak up, whether to accept injustice or challenge it." She paused, thinking of that moment on the train when she could have simply complied, opened her bag, avoided the confrontation. Dignity isn't something we should have to earn over and over again. Professional competence isn't something we should have to prove to strangers who've already made up their minds. And our right to travel, work, and exist without harassment shouldn't depend on whether we look like what someone expects. The applause was sustained, but Elena wasn't finished. Real change doesn't come from viral videos or news coverage. It comes from each person in this room choosing to intervene when they see bias in action. It comes from examining our own assumptions before we act on them. It comes from creating systems that protect people's dignity instead of requiring them to fight for it. Later, at the reception, a young medical student approached her, a young woman whose features suggested Middle Eastern heritage. "Dr. Vasquez, thank you for speaking up. I've been afraid to travel with my research materials because of how I might be perceived." Elena nodded. "I understand that fear. But don't let their limitations become yours. Carry yourself with the professionalism you've earned. And remember, when someone challenges your right to belong, they're revealing their own insecurities, not your inadequacies." The student smiled, standing a little straighter. Months passed. Elena continued her work at the CDC, published research on infectious disease protocols, and quietly mentored young professionals facing discrimination. She never sought publicity, but her influence spread through professional networks and medical communities. Then came an unexpected message through official channels. Richard Thornton's attorney had reached out, requesting a private meeting. No cameras, no lawyers present, just a conversation. Elena almost refused. The legal proceedings had concluded, Thornton had served his sentence, and she had moved on. But something about the request intrigued her. They met at a neutral location, a quiet cafe near Union Station. Thornton looked older, worn down by months of public scrutiny and professional consequences. "I don't expect forgiveness," he began. "I don't even know if I deserve to ask for it. But I wanted you to hear something from me directly." Elena waited, studying his face for signs of sincerity versus performance. "I've spent the last year in therapy, trying to understand how I became that person on the train. The man who saw an accomplished doctor and decided she was a threat. The man who thought his fear justified humiliating another human being." He paused, struggling with the words. "I grew up in communities where people who looked like me were always the norm, always the authority. I never had to question whether I belonged somewhere or whether my competence would be doubted. And somehow, that privilege twisted into an assumption that anyone different must be suspect." Elena listened without interrupting. She'd heard similar confessions before from patients, colleagues, even family members confronting their own biases. "I can't undo what I did," Thornton continued. But I've been working with diversity trainers, speaking to business groups about unconscious bias. Trying to help other people recognize what I couldn't see in myself. Why tell me this? Elena asked. Because you were right that day. About everything. And because I needed you to know that your words, painful as they were to hear, actually reached someone. They changed someone. Elena nodded slowly. Change is possible. But it requires more than feeling bad about past mistakes. It requires actively working to dismantle the systems and attitudes that create those moments in the first place. I know. And I'm trying. They talked for another hour, not as victim and perpetrator, but as two people grappling with the complexity of bias, redemption, and social change. When they parted, neither claimed the conversation had erased the past, but both felt it had contributed to a better future. A year later, Elena received a promotion to lead the CDC's emergency response team. Her first major assignment took her to a small airport in rural Montana, where a potential outbreak required immediate containment. As she approached the security checkpoint with her medical equipment, Elena noticed the TSA supervisor, an older white woman, studying her credentials carefully. Dr. Vasquez, the woman said. I recognize your name from the incident reports. We've implemented new protocols for medical professionals traveling with sensitive materials. She gestured to a streamlined verification process, designed to respect both security needs and professional dignity. Thank you, Elena said simply. As her plane lifted off toward Montana, Elena reflected on the journey from that train ride to this moment. The viral video had faded from social media. The news articles were archived and largely forgotten. But the real changes, the policy adjustments, the training programs, the conversations in break rooms and boardrooms, those continued. She thought about the medical students she mentored, the professionals who now traveled with more confidence, the transportation staff who had learned to distinguish between legitimate security concerns and discriminatory profiling. The work was far from finished. There would be other train rides, other confrontations, other moments requiring courage and composure. But each person who chose dignity over fear, each institution that chose inclusion over exclusion, each conversation that chose understanding over assumption, all of it mattered. Elena opened her laptop and began reviewing case files for the outbreak investigation. Outside the airplane window, the country stretched endlessly below, vast, complicated, and slowly, incrementally, becoming more just.